And of course, the anniversary of that Oakland Hills fire, the firestorm, or the tunnel fire, as people like to call it, is tomorrow.
Yep.
Very eerie to think about that when we talk about fire danger in the area, because that was one of the most devastating fires the Bay Area has ever seen.
Definitely. It sets the precedent, I think, for what we all recognize now is a worst-case scenario and a vulnerability that still exists to a particular degree. Those offshore winds were not as intense today, but we know that the potential is there for these strong Diablo winds, these strong northeasterly winds, to race across the entire Bay Area, including the East Bay Hills, but the entire Bay Area as a whole, which brings us to today's point. We've done a lot of coverage on that 13-acre fire, which has been the focus of coverage throughout the day today, kind of located here for the East Bay Hills. But watch what happens if we remember that there is still a big picture concern until we get to 8 o'clock. Tomorrow night. So everywhere that's shaded in pink on here, still included in a red flag warning until we get to 8 o'clock. And we looked at the winds a moment ago off the top of the newscast. I just want to revisit that one more time to look ahead, to see how the winds are going to be behaving across the landscape from now until we get to about tomorrow in the afternoon. So let's remove where the red flag warning is, and we're even going to say goodbye to the locator to help us keep the perspective on where that particular fire is for Oakland. And we're just going to watch the winds now over the next 12 hours, and we're going to animate those on. And there is not a whole lot of change. And in the one sense, that's good if you're the East Bay Hills. From another standpoint, it's maybe not the best news if you are in the North Bay, because once we animate the winds from now through about 12 hours of time, there's still a clear pattern on here for these to continue offshore. So we're watching the winds shading into yellow and orange up there coming down the Central Valley and then curving out over towards the North Bay Hills and come down here and take a look at the Golden Gate. Still have a little bit of residual here, so there's still enough momentum that those offshore winds, even as we go into tomorrow morning, are still detectable down here through the Golden Gate. That is an offshore wind, totally opposite of what we normally have here at home, and we're so used to living under the influence of onshore. That's why we have a marine layer. That's why the fog comes in, because all that stuff is getting swept onshore. That's why our humidity levels always stay so high. But in this little zone here, where the wind is going the opposite direction, these are the offshore winds. The Diablo wind is another way of just kind of labeling these. Mount Diablo sits out here. It's the most notable landscape feature there for the East Bay. That is the direction from which these winds come. So that's just another attempt to raise the public awareness on the way this all works here in the Bay. Southern California has called their offshore wind events Santa Ana winds for decades. And that name really has ingrained itself in the public awareness. So there's a little hope here that we can at least do the same for our local topography here, which is why sometimes you'll hear these referred to as Diablo winds. All right, we've gone into a lot of detail on what to expect from those. There's one thing I want to take a look at here in the longer range forecast. So once again, we're going to go big picture. There are still things to look at out in the Pacific. And when we bring on the imagery, this is going to be the satellite imagery showing us what's going on the big picture out here. There are systems getting developed in the Gulf of Alaska still. And if we go long range, we can put this into the forecast to show us how that, with rain visualized inside of those clouds, what kind of rain might we get out of that? So let's take off the clouds and let's put on the next week and a half of rain, and you're going to see a line of showers that's going to develop off the coast and try to work its way over California, but it's going to keep getting blocked. In other words, we're just going to kind of miss out on the best chance of rain, which is in here. Unfortunately, it just doesn't want to visualize for me, but you'll have to take my word on it. Bottom line, we don't have any significant rain events coming our way, and there you go. So you can now kind of see how the rain's going to play out over the course of the next. I went all the way out to near the end of the month with this, and we're not seeing any storms with good enough aim to get here. You see the image here? Matching the image behind me there using two separate models. This is the American model on here, that's the European. Trying my best to see if we can get some rain here through late October. Doesn't look like we will. So the takeaway from this is, until we get widespread wetting rain on our local topography, quarter of inch, half inch would be better. We're still in fire season. And this could go for a while. It certainly looks to go through the end of October. So each time we get one of these offshore wind events, and as we've been discussing, this is the likely time for us to see those. I don't see any more offshore wind events, by the way, in the next 7 days. But we're vulnerable to that, certainly over about the next 6 weeks, really through November. So if we get those, before we get the widespread wetting rain, we're going to be going back into red flag warnings again, likely across much of the bay. Thankfully, we've only got one red flag warning to discuss at this point. That's the one we've got now until we get to 8 o'clock tomorrow night. And then for the rest of the 7-day forecast, we don't see any of those. That's where things stand at this point. For now, Ryan, back to you.